and welcome to the PhD Life Coach podcast. And I have a guest with me again this week. I am really excited to welcome David Mendes, who is better known to many of you probably as Papa PhD and the host of Beyond Your Thesis podcast. So welcome, David. It's so fun to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be talking with you today across the pond.
Yes, absolutely. Always having to get my brain around time zones, which is not my strength, but we figured it out.
We
So
figured it out.
today we're going to be thinking about how to make career decisions and particularly thinking about how networking can be a really useful way to make decisions about what you want to do, not just something to be done at the last minute. But before we get going about that,
Yeah.
why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about you, how you got into what you're
hmm
doing and what else you do other than your podcast?
Yeah, I've been doing Beyond the Thesis, which at the beginning was just called Papa PhD, started in 2019, just before COVID, just before the pandemic. So this project of sharing people's career journeys after the PhD came up 9 years after my defense. I defended in 2010, did a PhD in cell biology, and what happened in 2010 was that I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to, project myself professionally into anything that wasn't being in the lab and continuing to do cell biology. I wasn't ready. I hadn't had any particular training on it. I didn't know people, let's say, in industry or in any other domains that weren't academia. And so this means that, for that 6 months to a year after defending, I was, floundering. I was trying to leverage my like personal and family network, which was actually how I got my first like contracts just after my PhD, and eventually trying to understand where people in the institute that I was were going that was not academia, and then reaching out to them and doing that kind of organic networking. But it was all done in a sense of urgency.
Mm.
I wouldn't say panic, but some people may panic because, they might be like me, far away from their family, even their continent of origin. And they found out or they understood that they don't want to stay in academia and to continue that path, but they need to keep paying the bills. And so it's legitimate to be kind of panicking in a certain way. In any case, I ended up finding my path into a domain which is medical writing. So through finding out where people who were in my institute were going, I ended up being able to find my first position there. But what happened in the years after, between 2010 and 2019, was that I started getting invitations to career panels. And so the thing that started happening was all the obstacles and all the difficulties that I thought, in my little personal bubble belonged to me and were my responsibility or my fault. I was seeing that each year I was going to these career panels and young graduate students who were almost finishing were sharing the same feelings that I had had at the end of my PhD. And that was kind of an aha moment for me that, oh, this was not just me. There's kind of this systemic phenomenon where people are getting to the end of their graduate studies journey and are feeling lost, they lose their footing, and they start having this doubt of, did I do the right thing first, or was it a strategic error on my part? And now I kind of made myself an overqualified and maladapted person in the job market. So jump to 2019. What happened that year was that for different reasons, I started on my own to have my own like medical writing and medical translation clients. So that plus the fact that and it's these serendipities, on Facebook, there was this article saying why you should start your podcast in 2019. And I had some gear and that kind of alignment of I have some time. I have this sense of mission of wanting to reduce the number of young, brilliant people who feel bad about their choice, maybe of following an academic path. I think it's unfair that that's how they feel after all these years of dedication to this journey. I'd love to find a way to inspire them, to comfort them in their choices, and also to comfort them that there's cool stuff out there for them after their degree. That was just kind of the right alignment of planets to get me started and to think, oh, I know like a handful of people who were in my institute when I was doing my PhD, and they're not in academia, and they're having fun being entrepreneurs, being science communicators, being in industry. And I'll reach out to them and see if they're interested in sharing their stories. And they were. And so that was how the whole concept of Papa PhD was born. And then, well, now we're almost reaching 6 years, right? So it's kind of, there's a snowball effect, of course. First, I started with the people I knew, and now I'm interviewing people that are much farther away from kind of my close circle of people I know.
So why do you think people find it so hard to figure out where else they could go?
Well, there's different aspects to it. One aspect is that the PhD is a very demanding endeavor, that the tendency is that it'll take most of your time, most of your bandwidth, most of your brain for all those years. So if there isn't some, either mandatory curriculum, let's say, that pushes you during your PhD journey to do some courses on networking or to have internships in government or in industry. Well, the PhD will absorb all of your energy, all of your time, and you'll stay in this tunnel vision because naturally, you know, it's kind of an ecology thing, right? If there's no competition for that space in your brain and in your life, the PhD is going to take all of that space. That's the first reason, I'd say. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. And I love that the visual of thinking of it as an ecology where things sort of expand to fill it is such a good way of thinking about that. I wonder whether there's also things about the sort of expectations and the kind of emotions around deciding that this route that lots of people who started a PhD thought might be their route isn't. And I wonder if you could sort of speak
Yeah.
to that a little.
So from all the people that I've interviewed, one of the main aspects that comes out is that it's only as you get into a PhD, into first year, second year, etc., and that you spend all those hours with your supervisor, that you actually see what being the head of a lab is. And often you come into the experience, you're brought into a PhD, and what you bring with you is kind of this romanticized, let's say, image of the scientist that is probably based on some 50s, 60s era or even 70s reality, but which today does not exist anymore. Of you have a scientific question you are really passionate about, you'll be given a space in university to kind of dig into that and bring young people with you to also dig into that. But then no one talks to you about all the admin, all the boards you need to be on, all the grant writing. And so all of that kind of is revealed to you once you're in it. And I think I'd say the that's a big chunk, maybe it's the largest proportion would be that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And that's without, I mean, you've already alluded to this in your own story, but that's even without the kind of geography impact. People often don't realize quite what level of sort of geographical relocation is often. I mean, I'm speaking as someone who stayed at the same place, so I am not one to speak on that. But for lots of people at the moment, regular relocations are going to be part of that journey and things. I think often it's that side as well that people don't
Mhm.
even necessarily know is what's coming.
That's it. The other aspect is the competition. I know that in life sciences where I was, the competition for funds, for grants, etc., even like between labs is something you also don't know about.
Mm.
And not everyone appreciates living with that pressure. And a reality today, at best, 1 in 5 of the people in a PhD cohort will be able to get a tenure track position. So this means that the other four actually we are going to have to scramble to find other ways to stay adjacent or in academia. And I think that translates into pressure on the graduate students, and they feel it during graduate school. But then, even if they start on the first postdoc, second postdoc, there's people who end up realizing then after 1, 2 postdocs that, okay, I've pushed this far and there's a wall that I can't break through. And then people need to reorient after with such dedication and so much, blood, sweat, and tears, trying their best to break through to that thing that in the end ends up being, out of reach. And I think that if somehow there was some, I'd like to say mandatory, but at least easily accessible career training during the journey, starting in graduate school, then the day you need to pivot, you wouldn't need to feel that bad about it. Because somehow you say, okay, this didn't pan out, but hey, I have in my network, I know people in this, I can easily negotiate myself, my path, my journey towards something else. And I feel that a lot of people end up having these negative feelings towards academia and feelings of regret towards the choices they've made on that side. And I think it's unfair. I think choosing to work towards augmenting the community's knowledge is something the society needs, and it shouldn't be something that people feel regret about. That's my mission. It's to kind of normalize the fact that the post PhD journey is not a one track thing, and also to tell people that not following the historic canonical path is not failure. That's my main mission with Papa PhD and with Beyond the Thesis.
So yeah, so true. And you mentioned that we're going to touch on that network thing in a second, but the other thing I wanted to just add was when you were talking about people starting to regret their choices, starting to resent academia and stuff, it really struck me what a difficult mindset that is to then be looking for jobs as well. Because, it feels rubbish to be questioning your choices and thinking, should I have done something different 5 years ago? And to be getting angry at academia that things aren't the way they should be. That all feels unpleasant.
Hmm.
But I think there's a big element to which that also then makes it really hard to look for other options in a way that's exciting and inspired and all that stuff. If
Yeah.
you're starting from this place where you've made a mistake somehow. And that's where I think the stuff that you're doing is so important to help people to kind of almost put to one side that resentment and regret and be like, no,
Hmm.
there's a ton out there. There's so many things.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking like that, you're so much more likely to find them and engage with them.
Yeah. Thank you. And I totally agree. One third aspect that I'd want to add is, and I kind of identify with this a little bit, is also so to do with why it's difficult at the end. I myself know that one of the reasons I decided to keep on going with my academic studies was one, my curiosity about science, but also I at different stages where, oh, do I go to the master's? Oh, do I go to the PhD? Or do I go get a job? I was seeing what people my age and my colleagues who were going straight to the job market were doing, and I didn't identify with that. And somehow, if that's one of the reasons or one of the motives that brought you to keep on studying was I don't see myself, I don't identify myself with people doing this or that job, going straight to industry, going straight to sales or whatever. I'm going to keep studying and try to become an academic. The other difficulty is then once you see that actually being an academic is not what I thought, and now I actually need to look back at what I kind of rejected in a certain
Mhm.
way at the beginning. And so that's also emotionally, it's difficult because I have to actually go back on my word and actually look at these places in industry that I had rejected at a certain point. But you need to think that you're not going to go into it with the same
Mhm.
background. Now bring all those years of like deep thinking, of managing and taking this very long project to its conclusion, of communicating science, of digesting science, of treating data. One of the messages that I want to bring in and why it's important to talk with people out there that have journeys that are inspiring to you is because they can show you kind of the path of how now with this background that you have you can go back into the space which you didn't identify too much with 5 years ago, but now there's another way you can bring value to that space, and that's the ray of hope is and the inspiration is, and that's what I try to bring with the Beyond the Thesis conversations.
Yeah. And we've mentioned networking a couple of times, and it's always a word that people kind of react to in various emotional ways. In fact, as you know, we've had Dr. Jen Polk on before talking about networking. So, in this context, what are you meaning by networking?
What I want people to start considering is not putting on a suit and going to an event and sharing, a contact card and saying, "Hi, I'm da da da, I'm looking for a job." That's not it. What I want to share is that because as scientists, as PhDs, we have this tendency of, I'm going to go it alone. I can do the research all on my own. I'm going to go through the data and find, what is it I want to do. I want to posit that this is a natural but a wrong reflex to have because the jobs and the job market is a very complex thing. And just by using your normal, research and data crunching abilities and capabilities that you developed through all these years, you are going to be missing different things. And one of the things you're going to be missing is, does this job or does this employer that on paper is checking all the marks there, this makes sense, but does it really align with my values? Is it really somewhere where I will flourish? Is it somewhere where I'll have fulfillment and pleasure in what I do? And you can't get that just with the data that's out there. When you go into a networking event or into a networking interaction with someone in an informational interview, please don't go into it thinking, is this person going to get me a job? I want you to take it as an exploratory exercise, but also a social exercise. Of course, you need to find people who are inspiring to you and who genuinely you're curious about their journey. And this conversation with this person will help you kind of imagine if you have, a color by numbers map of the job market that's all blank. This person is going to help you put some color in
Mm.
different places and help you build an actual map of, oh, okay, so the culture in this domain is like this. I like it, or very important, I don't like it. And because these are two very important outcomes
Mm.
of networking in this context is understanding where I would love to work and why, or where I would hate to work and why. And sometimes you go in thinking, oh, this is, perfect for me. And then you talk with someone who works at this or that company or in this or that space, and you understand, huh, actually, this wasn't what it looked like. And actually, now that I've had this conversation, I know that I don't need to put effort there. because somehow it doesn't align. So it's really, creating social capital, knowing people in the space, but it's very much a kind of a job market cartography exercise. It's because for all the solo research you do, nothing is going to give you as much rich information about a position or about an employer than talking with someone who works or worked there, because of how much in a 20-minute conversation can be exchanged between two people. Plus, if you really choose people who you admire for some reason or who intrigue you for some reason, you will also be creating relationships that you can then nurture forever, and that eventually will become part of your, what I call your village, and who eventually will think of you if they see a job posting come by and say, oh, you know what, David actually could be a great person for this. I'll reach out to him. If you go to someone with that I need a job from you kind of feeling and tone, it feels transactional. It feels, it doesn't align with the kind of concept that I'm trying to share.
Yes, absolutely. You made me think of a conversation I had over the weekend, which is a slightly flippant example of the importance of a village. But a very good friend of mine who did her PhD about the same time as mine has a friend who also did a PhD and is now very high up in the world of sports drinks and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And her son is a competitive, like under 18 international sports person here in the UK, and was having an argument with his mum about whether he should be taking creatine and doing protein shakes and all of this
Okay.
stuff, because he was adamant he definitely should be. He's 60.
Okay.
And she was not convinced. And so she's just like, I'll find out. And so she
Hmm.
contacted her friend who's like super high up in R&D in this world, was like, should he be taking it? No, I win this argument. Not until you're older.
There you go.
So even just silly things like that, she's like, that's why you need to know people who do interesting things, because
That's it.
sometimes it will help you win an argument with your teenager.
That's it. And yeah, no, it's a great example. Even when you're during graduate school, if you're able to, this means that by the time you get your degree, you have this kind of safety net of people who are in different spaces, who have different stories to share, who can be sounding boards for you for your decisions. There's this concept of a board of directors, right? If you are able to build a board of directors for yourself of people whom you don't expect anything of in terms of like getting a job or anything, but with whom you've developed an interest for them, but there's a relationship that's been created that's authentic, that's non-transactional, it's going to allow you in moments of difficulty, which of course there are because by definition, PhD, there will be difficulties there. You'll have other voices, except your own in your head, which often is going to be potentially negative. You'll be able to have some other people chiming in and kind of pushing you forward, but also helping you have a wider horizon of thinking, well, if this doesn't pan out, I know that there's other things that can. And when it gets panicky is when you really have that single objective and that starts getting difficult. And then you think, oh my God, I'm failing. And that's what I don't want. I don't want people going through that after all that effort, after all that dedication.
Yeah. And a metaphor you used earlier just really opened something up for me, that this idea of thinking of it as a map where you're trying to fill in information on different aspects of this kind of possible career map. Because
Hmm.
people like me, my background, none of my parents went to university. I say none, I have step parents and things. None of my parents went to university. They're all sort of either go into a business and work your way up or start a business kind of people. And so I had that world. And then I went to university and I found my academic world. But it's only when I was thinking of it in terms of that map, like you were talking about, that I realized that in my career, I made my understanding of what it was like to work in academia super vivid. I was
Hmm.
surrounded by people that were doing that. And I knew lots of people from my family who were doing like job, and some quite good professional jobs and that. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but jobs. And I can't, other than people I did my PhD with, I can't remember really knowing people who had a PhD and weren't in academia. We had
Hmm.
one neighbor who worked in academia. And other than that, I can't think of anyone that was in that thing. And so just thinking about it now, I had huge blank patches where it's like, this is stuff you do if you don't have a PhD.
Yeah.
And this is the thing you do if
When you
you
do
have
have
a
one.
PhD. And I love this idea of just trying to sort of fill in some of those gaps because otherwise the vividness that you have around academia because you're in it every day for either good or bad. I think this is
Yeah.
brilliant for people who love academia and think they want to stay in academia. I
Hmm.
half wonder, had I, during my PhD and postdoc, had more exposure to more of this, whether I would have been quite as convinced to stay in academia. Because whilst I
Hmm.
thought it was an amazing idea, who knows what other amazing stuff I would have found.
Yeah, I find it super interesting that you say that, which is this also works for people who want to stay in academia, and that's something that I also try to drone on, which is even if your current objective is to stay in academia, if you go to a conference and someone inspires you, even if they're not in your domain, take the opportunity to talk with them and ask them, how are you able to, let's say, develop such an interdisciplinary career and how do you make this or that work at your university or in your institute? What, what did mentors tell you that really helped you? And because there's no better approximation to your future, be it in 2, 3, 5 years, than someone who's there now. So talk to these people.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I used to be, obviously, while I was an academic, I was a personal tutor. And so we'd be talking to students about what are your career plan, whether it was undergrad or PhD students. And so often they'd still be like, yeah, I should talk to some people. Once I've figured out what I want to do, I'll talk to some people. I would constantly be like, how about we talk to some people to help you figure out what you want to do?
Exactly.
And like, no. I just need to decide. And once I've decided, I'll speak
Yeah.
to people working in that industry. So, how do you respond to? I just got increasingly exasperated with them, which didn't work. How do you respond to somebody who says, yeah, that's great. Once I've decided I want to be a medical writer, I'll talk to
Hmm.
David.
Hmm. I totally can see how that was a very frequent answer from people. First, finding out this one thing that you want to do is going to be a very difficult endeavor for different reasons. The first reason is you are here now at, let's say, year two of your PhD. And of course, in Europe, PhDs usually the last 3 years, and but here in North America, it could be 4, 5, 6. So you can say that and then go home and when you leave, when you finish your PhD, the job market, the landscape will have changed a bunch. So if this is your mindset, you may be in this like pedaling to find something that is unfindable because the terrain is changing. And, at the beginning of your PhD, let's say, being a data scientist is something that looks really great, but then 5 years later, it's not anymore. And so the my answer to this would be you are not going to find this kind of El Dorado. You're not going to find this just out of your effort right now. S- And the second thing is in this search of yours, where you think you're going to find this one gold nugget, you're going to often be digging and then you'll find a bunch of coal and then you'll find just basalt. And so you can also lose a bunch of time not finding the right thing or finding, you know, things that are not a match for you. So the best my best advice to you, because again, one-on-one communication with another human is a shortcut to getting much denser information and much more real information, is start talking today and be curious. So don't have this like one track mind of I want to find the thing. Sample, and this will give you two great sets of information. I have the bucket of likes and I have the bucket of dislikes. And this is great because eventually, when then you need to really look for a position, you have this bucket of things that you can already put to the side and not spend any energy on. That would be my advice. And again, when they're young like that and they have this way of thinking, maybe this wouldn't make them change their way of thinking, but I think that would be the way I would approach it.
Definitely. So let's get specific. People listening who are sort of thinking either they're not sure they want an academic career or they're not sure they'll be able to have an academic career because of the competitiveness. Where would you suggest they start? How do they find these people? What do they ask them?
Okay. First, give them a sense that they're right, and say, start where you think you want to go. So let's say that you're thinking, I don't know, in my domain, it would be, I want to be a medical science liaison. So what you need to do now is to go on LinkedIn, and that's the platform I'd say is the one to go. Even if you're an academic now, everyone's there now, and everyone who's interested in actually discussing careers and even hiring, etc. But you go on LinkedIn, maybe go geographically around you. So there's filters you can use there. So find people in this geographical area who are medical science liaisons. If possible, they even are alumni from the place that you are, which gives you a kind of a bridge to say, hey, I'm now studying the same program that you are, and I saw you're a medical science liaison. It feels to me that it's something that I like to do in the future. Could we meet and talk for 20 minutes? And that's the first step. And then what I was saying is you're trying to build a map. So go in with questions. Go in with questions that you've prepared. Go in with curiosity, and then let the person tell their story based on the questions that you prepared. They'll probably have questions for you, so be ready to answer that too. But then ask the type of questions that will allow you to have this kind of pinball effect, which is, so who inspired you when you were at the end of the
Interesting.
career?
Yeah.
Who was a mentor? Have one or two questions that, and you can even ask, who would you recommend I talk next? Because I really want to understand what's in the cards for me in the future. So always try to make it organically a snowball effect that starts small, but that then there's always a follow-up step for you. And this will do two things. It'll help you kind of grow this network, but also it'll kind of put it on your agenda what the next step is.
Yeah.
Because like we were saying, the PhD, the tendency is that it'll take all of your time, it'll take your whole agenda. So if there's no pressure there, like positive pressure to create space for something else, it won't be there. So come in genuinely curious about understanding, why the person gravitated towards that position. If you've thought of your values, let's say you value hybrid work, ask questions about that, etc. And then that's it. The outcome could be, oh, this actually confirms what I thought about being a medical science liaison, or okay, I had some wrong ideas about what it is. And actually, after talking with this person, which was gracious enough to spend this time with me, I now know that I don't need to put more energy on this. And so now I need to turn my radar somewhere else and restart the exercise.
Yeah. And that is a win too, right? Like you
That is
said
a win too.
earlier, that actually, having an interview where you walk away going, oh no, 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 is a massive win because it stops you wasting time over there too, right?
Precisely.
One of the things that struck me while you were talking was it might be interesting to ask people, were there other careers that you considered before you ended up in this one?
That would
And
be a great
see if
question.
they've got ideas like that, especially, if it's something a little bit adjacent to what they're doing. Because I think sometimes we have quite a limited, we have those kids' books where it's like, what do you want to be? I'm going to be a teacher or a doctor or a footballer.
Fireman.
And those are our options, kind of thing. And I think sometimes we just don't even know what jobs are out there. And I wonder
Yeah.
whether sometimes by going for one that we know exists and asking them what they discounted, you might actually find some things that you didn't even know were there.
Totally true. And often, and again, I'm thinking of like pharmas and companies that are related to what I did during my PhD. Often, these people will have colleagues who are PhDs and even within their organization and
Yeah.
who are doing different things. Asking the person, "Oh, by the way, do you have colleagues who are also like PhDs and who are doing different things?"
It's so interesting because I think sort of getting to not only ask about the job itself, but asking about what they love and hate about it and what's important to
Right.
them. So I come from a sports science background, and all of our students, undergrad anyway, think they're going to work in elite sport. That's their kind of goal. At PhD level, it's much less so, but some of them do go on into that environment. And I remember talking with some of them that had gone off to do that sort of thing, working with Olympic athletes and stuff,
Okay.
and asking them about their priorities and how they enjoyed it and stuff, and just listening to it like, this is fascinating and I don't care. So it's like, for you, this is amazing. I will watch the sports. I will cheer you on. I will be ecstatic if this all is good for you. But the idea of going to work every day, where my goal is to make sure we shave 1 second off their performance because, silver is the first loser and all of that stuff. I just don't get it. It doesn't, it rocks their world. And they
Yeah.
would talk about all this stuff so passionately. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I'd quite like silver. Silver's quite nice. That's good too.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wouldn't be that fun. And so I think just getting that idea of what is it that you love about this job, and then being able to be like, oh no, that's not important. Because sometimes people are like, oh, I really get to travel all the time. I'm only at home a week a month. It's incredible. I get to see all these different places. And then for other people, it's like, no, that
Yeah.
sounds great for you, not
For
me.
you. Exactly.
Um, yeah, I think that's so interesting.
Definitely, definitely. But I think in this exercise of building this village and having these conversations, what's important, I think, is to understand that this diversity exists and that there's space for it in the job market. Because one of the things that I remember I felt is this fear of, oh, okay, gosh, I had one chance and I kind of blew it in a certain way, and now that I I have this fear that I am this weird shaped puzzle piece that's not going to fit anywhere. But there's so much out there uh, that like you said, if you have this approach of the kids' books of you're a fireman, you're an astronaut, you're this or that, it's really not like that. But the only way to understand and to know that actually there's this place that maybe I'm not an exact fit, but I'm a pretty good fit, is by talking with people and by understanding that often things that feels like it's very square, and especially if you look at job postings, it looks like you need to be like this, like this, and then you talk with the hiring manager, and actually they really want to know other things about you. And again, I don't think there's a better way than talking with someone who has been there or who's there now, and that can really kind of um, recalibrate your expectation of what the experience is.
And in terms of when to do this, it
Mhm.
sounds like you're talking about pretty much throughout your PhD experience.
Ideally,
Yeah.
and you may even be better placed to actually tell me about your experience. But I feel that first year students are very much in this how do you say, I just have like puppy love coming as an expression, but in this beginning of a relationship, like wide-eyed, oh, I just got
Yeah.
into my program, I'm a PhD student now. So I think it's probably very challenging or more challenging to expect that first year students are going to to be putting some time looking at more than their academic, this thing that they just got onto, and then you can weigh in on that, given that your experience with students. But I think, once that kind of honeymoon phase of I got into my PhD program and you announce it on your socials, I'd say at 6 months, uh, if you can start seeing, okay, where do graduates of my program, where are they located now on the job market? And maybe you're really focused on academia and you can do that and see where are they in academia and start talking with them. I think that's important.
Mm.
But I think it's also as important to see, and those who are not in academia, where are they? What are they doing? And to do it just out of, yes, curiosity, but also it's kind of as a kind of self-preservation instinct of, I'm now in this honeymoon period, but someone is telling me that in 3 years, you're going to be ejected out of this reality. You're going to have this degree, and then you're going to have to figure things out. So, yeah, I'm in the middle of my first year or beginning of my second year. Part of what I'm doing now is preparing myself to be a professional. So I want to be ready for any outcome. So I'm going to kind of create this cushion of knowledge, but also ideally this network of people. And I'll start and say, let's say once a month, I try to reach out to someone.
Yeah.
That, or just that already would be a great thing.
Yeah. Definitely. And I definitely take your point that like people are not necessarily thinking about afterwards early on. And for me, I think what then becomes important is to think of the other benefits of why you're doing this too.
Yeah.
Because these sorts of reach outs are amazing for working out what you might do afterwards. But they could have other benefits too. I've seen people who have had chance conversations with people in different industries who've found parallels between their research and something they hadn't even imagined before, things like that. Or
Hmm.
they've just met really interesting people. And I think if we can also maybe take almost a little bit of the seriousness out of it, that this is an amazing way to set yourself up for your career, but it's actually a real privilege just to have some interest. It's a cheap excuse to talk to some cool people, right? So one of the
Yeah,
things I love about having a podcast is I get to just
exactly.
contact random people like you who are really impressive and interesting and be like, oh, can we talk? We'll record
Yeah.
it. People will listen. So I think there is an element to which it could be seen just as a let's just talk to people, you
Yeah.
know, tell them what you do, find out more about what they do. Be super interesting, even if you never do anything in that direction.
That's totally true. And actually, I'm remembering one of the episodes. Now I'm not remembering the name, but I was talking with someone who went for their PhD in England, and the person would go have lunch with the philosophy people, and then and this is you staying in the academic thing in the
Mm.
academic bubble, but it even, and I don't remember the exact example, but I remember them telling me, actually there were projects that were born out of that because I was having lunch with a philosopher and I was discussing my physics thing, and then there was some kind of bridges between the two, and there was a project born out of that. So just even widening a little bit of who you are interacting with day to day at university can already bring some like cross pollination and widen the view of what you do. So for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. It's been amazing talking with you. I'm sure lots of my listeners are already familiar with your podcast, but for anybody who isn't, tell them where they can find you and how they can find out more about what you do.
Sure. So the podcast is Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. You can find it on all podcasting platforms. There's a French version too. You can find me and reach out on LinkedIn, David Mendes. You should find me. The other way to talk to me directly is to go to the community I've just created on this platform called School, where I have some like Zoom coffee time, like weekly coffee time sessions there. So it's skool.com/Papa PhD. And it's a place where I try to have like direct one-on-one or group, but direct contact with the community. There's also Papa PhD on YouTube if you like to see the video versions.
Perfect.
Thank you, Vicky. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And I think it goes to show how just the power of conversation, in our lives. And I think it's another moment for me just to tell people out there who may be introverts like I am. Of course, now I've been doing this podcast for a while, and my introversion, I was able to kind of build some muscle around it. But, of course, conserve your energies if you're an introvert, but do consider the power of having conversations with new people. It's huge. It can really help you a lot. And especially, it can help you break some like cycles of negativity or some cycles of negative self-talk that you might be in, because it'll bring in someone else's view into the conversation. So yeah, if that's the only thing that you take from today, that having more conversations with new people, I'll be happy for that outcome.
I'm sure everyone will take lots. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
everyone,
you,
for
Vicky.
listening, and see you next week.